All right. Well, welcome everybody to Wednesday Night Online. Hey, what a privilege it is to be able to hang out with you for a few minutes in the middle of our week. We want to come to you and just bring these to you as one more opportunity to call a time out in the middle of a week for just a few minutes and continue to grow. Just quiet your mind and heart for a second. We know how busy life is. We know how busy the day probably has been for you. And so to be able to just kind of block it out for a quick second, make sure we have one more opportunity to grow in our faith and just be encouraged by what God's word says. Man, this is what this is for. And so we look forward to moments like this. A big shout out to Jeff Redwine, who's been leading us along through this study of the story of Job. He's been leading us along the way, and so I get to jump in here every once in a while and help him and fill in for him. And so I'm super grateful for him. There's a bunch of folks like that at our church who just are gifted this way and are grateful. We are grateful that they have the heart to and the desire to want to teach. And man, I'm thankful for him doing that. Others along the way as well have jumped in to do that. So we're going to continue that study for the next, probably a couple weeks at least. There's just so much in this story. It's a powerful story. It's a tough story in so many ways. And we'll continue to learn about that even today. What are some things we see in ourselves we can learn about us that the story of Job teaches us about ourselves. So we know the Bible's full of great, impactful stories, and Job's story is no different. And that's not an easy story. It's not light and fluffy and feel good. Okay, this is tough and it's real and it's raw and it's hard and it's difficult. It's difficult. There's no way around it. It's about how to survive on your worst day. What Job experienced is something we never want. None of us want a story like Job's, right? I mean, if you read through his story, it's not like you're saying, man, I want the story of David who slayed Goliath and all these amazing things happened to David. Now he had some bad stuff. I don't want that part of his story. We don't read Job's story and think, oh man, I can't wait till I go through that. He had the worst of days. He had the worst of news. He had the worst of circumstances. And some of the things he experienced, man, it's honestly, we see his story and we think, that's not even fair. It's not even fair. Job seemed like a good guy, right? I mean, there's some things about him we'll learn that just positioned him uniquely in his city and even how his faith helped him. And there's stories you and I can learn from. If you hang with me for the next handful of minutes or so here, I just know there's going to be some things from Job's story that we can pull out and apply to our own life, maybe see where we are compared to where he was or how we would respond with what happened to him. Job lost everything. I mean, do a quick little recap, right? He lost his family, lost his kids, he lost his way of income, he lost status, he lost health, he lost friends, he questioned God, he got depressed, he got bad advice. People that were close to him were of no help. He got ridiculed. He got judged. He got the raw end of the deal, it seems like, as we look at this story. I mean, what do we do with that? I mean, how would you respond if you were Job? And wave after wave of bad news came your way. Wave after wave, a bad phone call was followed by a bad email, was followed by a bad circumstance at work, was followed by a bad health challenge, was followed by friends turning their backs on you. Was right? I mean, how would you go through that? I look at this story and I think, I don't know how he did that. I don't know how he did that the way he did. And one of the interesting things about the story of Job, we've learned this about Job, is who he was before everything happened to him played a very important role in how he responded as these things and after these things happened to him. Who he was before, who he had already been, impacted how he handled what he experienced. I've heard it said, and you've probably heard it said too, that what's already inside of us is what spills out when we hit a bump in the road. Imagine if you had a cup of coffee and you're heading to work and you don't see a pothole coming on the way. Maybe that's the case where you live and the certain path you take to work. Maybe you got that cup of coffee and you hit a pothole and man, coffee spills out because the car bounces, right? We could say, well, coffee spilled on the way to work today, and it was the pothole caused that, and it's coffee spill. I spilled that coffee all over the place. Well, truth of the matter is, if we reel back just a little bit, the reason coffee spilled, yes, you hit the speed bump, but the reason the coffee spilled is because the coffee was inside the cup. If it would have been water, water would have spilled. If it would have been Coke, Coke would have spilled. If it would have been sweet tea would have spilled, because whatever we put inside is what's going to come out when we hit a bump in the road, and the same is true for us. As life goes on, and what Job experienced, who he was made the difference in what he was facing. So who are you becoming? Who am I becoming? What are we filling our lives with? Now imagine something with me for just a quick second as we consider this story. Imagine someone comes into the room, or someone comes where you are right now in the next few minutes, and they enter the location where you are. They come into your room, they come into your house, they come into wherever you are, right? And it's a representative of the U.S. Olympic Search Committee, and they've chosen you to represent the United States in the 100-yard dash in the Olympics. You're it. Our hopes for a gold medal are squarely on your shoulders. Oh, and by the way, the race is tomorrow. Okay, now how would that go for you? How would you be in that race? And now probably it wouldn't be a question of effort. How would you do? Probably not super great, I'm guessing. Maybe you're a world-class athlete and I didn't know that. And if you are, hey, I'm your biggest fan. I'm rooting you on. I'm rooting you on even if you aren't, right? But the truth is, we most of us, right, myself included, we wouldn't do very well in that contest. And it wouldn't be because of the effort. It would be because of the preparation. It wouldn't be about trying. It would be about training. We hadn't trained for it. We hadn't been disciplined along the way. We hadn't prepared ourselves for whatever was coming next. And the thing about Job is, although he didn't know what was coming, and we're going to get to that in a quick second, he had prepared himself for some things. Who he was before impacted who he was during, right? Does that make sense? So who are we becoming? What are we filling our lives with? There's some important lessons from the story of Job and some lessons we can learn about us. First thing we want to look at about the story of Job is in Job chapter 1, verse 1. Now again, we've learned some things about what Job had. Job had a wife, he had 7 sons, he had 3 daughters, he had great possessions, he had thousands of livestock, sheep and camels, and a large number of oxen and donkeys. He was well known, he was well respected, he had all of these things. But this verse is about who he was. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Now you may think, well, I'm none of that. But you can start being that today. Maybe we don't feel like we could live up to Job chapter 1. John chapter 1 verse 1 wouldn't describe me as this. I can't live up to Job. Maybe you're saying the story of your life wouldn't start that way, but what if it started today? You see, because Job was already these things. He had already made a decision. I will be like this. And him being this kind of person impacted who he was in the good and the bad. That's a big part of this story. And it matters because of the first lesson we'll look at tonight from Job's life. We never know ahead of time the plans God has for us. We never know ahead of time the plans God has for us. Job had no idea what the day would hold. When you read through Job's story and the first thing that comes to him and the first test of his faith and the first trial that he experienced, there was no warning of bad news coming that day. That day started like every other day. There was no sign in the sky. There was no email. There was no text message. There was no special warning that came to him saying, hey, the bad stuff is starting tomorrow. That day started like any other day. So Job entered that day being blameless and upright and a man of faith, and he walked with God, and he was very serious about those things. And we have to understand that God's plan is unfolding aside from our awareness, and that plan is from a God who always knows what is best. We know that from a couple verses in the Bible besides what we've learned from the story of Job. Let's check them out really, really quick. Says this in Jeremiah 29, 11 through 13. This is God saying, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Look at the next couple verses. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. There's a plan God has for you, and it's good. And if you seek after God, he's not running away. He's not playing hide and seek. You can find him in the good and the bad. Look at the next verse, Proverbs 20:24. A man's steps are from the Lord. How then can man understand his way? A man's steps are ordered, some versions say, by the Lord. So we don't go through this life haphazardly or just randomly. That God's working a plan for us. God is working a plan for us. Look at the last verse we'll look at for this lesson. 1 Peter 5:6-7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him. Why? Because he cares for you. That's who God is. That's the core of what he's all about. Yes, he cares for you. Yes, he loves you. Yes, though, at the same time, we have to understand God has good plans for you and I. Those plans are good. They're not always easy and comfortable, but they're always good. The thing about God's plans for us is we never get asked about them. Now, that's the tough part of Job's story. God didn't come to Job, and say, hey, Job, I got something coming your way. I'm going to give you a 2-week heads up. Now, at the end, it's going to be good. There's going to be people who live long after you that are going to watch your story. They're going to look at you. They're going to take their cues from you about how to go through really hard circumstances. And Job, you're my guy who I'm going to use to teach that lesson, and it's starting tomorrow. Job didn't get that heads up. But you and I today, this far away from when this originally happened, we're learning from the story of Job how to go through your worst day. We're still benefiting from what Job experienced. That's why it's so important that we focus on now who we are so that we are ready for what's coming. If we've learned anything about the year 2020, we have no idea what's coming next. All right? You know that, right? So don't let this scare you. Let it inspire you to get prepared. Because we have no idea the plan that God is unfolding in our life. But we can trust that that plan is good. Not always easy and comfortable, but good. Second lesson is this. That a vertical perspective will keep us from horizontal panic. If we have this vertical perspective, it keeps us from panicking for what we see here now, because we know that there's this heavenly viewpoint, there's this eternal perspective going on, that God's in control, that this isn't spinning out off the rails, that God has got this under control. Job gives us an example of this vertical perspective. Job chapter 1, verse 20, and then a couple verses after. Then Job arose. This is after all the tough stuff, the first round of tough stuff. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground, and worshipped. Look at the next 2 verses. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked shall I return. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Look at verse 22. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. This is an amazing part of Job's testimony. Job was overwhelmed. I mean, look at what it says. He tore his robe, he shaved his head. This was customary mourning practice of the day. Later, he sits on a pile of ashes. Job was broken and sad. He was hurting. He didn't deny the reality of the pain that he was going through, but ultimately, he had something that held him together when everything else was falling apart. And don't you want that? Man, I want that. You know what? Because I don't know what's coming tomorrow, and neither do you. But what if? What if there's a way that we can keep it together when everything else feels like it's falling apart? It's like Job saying, the same God who gave everything to me is the same God right now who's chosen to take it away. And God has that right, and I'm going to trust him because I know his way is good. I'm still going to honor him with the way I live. It's not about blind faith or denying the emotion or the pain of the experiences and loss. It's about a vertical perspective. It's about seeing things differently and knowing that there's a God that helps you hold it together. One author put it this way, because this is what we face. It's easier to lower your view of God than to raise the level of your faith. Think about that for a second. It's easier to lower your view of God than raise the level of your faith. Job could have easily said, well, I guess God doesn't care about me. I used to think God was way up here when everything is good and everything is blessing and everything is awesome and the wind is blowing just right and my kids are behaving and the checkbook looks good and the job is safe and secure and my health is okay and all these things, right? Man, God's awesome and God's amazing, but if something bad happens, sometimes our view of God begins to drop. It's easier to do that instead of saying, okay, I know God's way up here. Let me try to get my faith up there closer to him. Most of us, most people, we go through what Job went through, we start thinking God lost control. He doesn't love us anymore. He doesn't care about us, and he's nowhere to be found. And Job didn't lower his view of God. He raised his level of faith. You see, we have to have the same view of God whenever things are good and whenever things are not so good. And we do have a choice with how we endure tough times, with hope or without hope. And I'm just curious, which do you think is the better way to live? See, tough stuff is just tough stuff without a faith to hold you and a God that you know that loves you and the Bible to lean on. Without that, tough stuff is just tough stuff. But with it, it's for a purpose. There's a purpose in my pain. It's God can use this. He's teaching me something. He's changing me so I can help change other people. And yes, I'm going to go through some hard things in life. But when we do, I want to challenge you. Don't lower your view of God. Let's raise the level of our faith. Easy to say, hard to do, but we can do it. We can do it. Let's take our cue from Job and make sure that we honor God with the way we live every single day, both in the good and in the bad. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. We look forward to more moments like this in the future. Can't wait to see you next time. Have a great rest of your evening.